All right, Krishna, everyone. This is acyuta-bhava from Nightlight Astrology, and today is Bhakti Wednesday. I'm really excited to have two of my friends, mentors, fellow practitioners of Bhakti Yoga, Loka and Vidarbha, joining me today for a special Q&A episode. You guys have submitted really great questions over the past month or two, and I've been aggregating them and saving them for a chance to have Loka and Vidarbha with me to try to respond to them. They fell into so many different categories that what I did for today's episode was I tried to get sort of essentialize a variety of questions that all had something in common at the roots philosophically. So if you don't hear the exact articulation of your question, it's probably because I sort of generalized it along with maybe 5 or 6 other questions that were a lot like it. That being said, before we dive into today's episode, I want to remind all of you that Loka and Vidarbha have a class coming up on the Bhagavad Gita. And I'm just going to direct you to their website really quick. It's bhaktywise.com. And if you click on the Study With Us tab, you're going to see a class coming up called Unlocking the Mysteries of the Bhagavad Gita. It's a 12-week immersion into the sacred Bhakti scripture, the Bhagavad Gita. It's probably the most impactful book I've ever read. It's not very long, but it is very deep and wonderful. It's perfect for people who have read it but want to go deeper, who have never read it but heard about it. It starts on March 15th, runs till May 31st. It meets on Tuesdays from 8 to 9:30 p.m. Eastern time. All of the sessions are recorded if you can't make it live, and there's also optional mantra meditation classes that are part of the course. As you guys know, I love mantra meditation. Couldn't recommend this program highly enough. And if you scroll to the bottom of this page, you'll find out how to enroll in the program, and it's by donation. A lot of people have been emailing me saying, what do you suggest? I suggest $75 or $100. If you have more, please do whatever you can. But also, whatever your budget is just fine. So that's a really generous offering that Loka and Vidarbha have made for everyone. So I hope you'll check it out, bhaktywise.com, especially if you like what they have to say this evening with our interview. And I won't say any more. Thanks for being here, Loka and Vidarbha. Really happy to have you back.
Thank you, Acyuta.
Thank you. It's always such a pleasure.
Yeah, it was a pleasure to be with you.
So we have some really good questions today. And these are questions coming from people who have been asking very sincere questions. I'm really interested in Bhakti. I find the Bhakti Wednesday talks really enjoyable. And yet I have this question, this doubt or this curiosity. And the first thing I want to say, and I'm sure you guys would agree, is that sometimes people think that when you take to a faith path, a spiritual path such as Bhakti, that doubts have to go out the window. You don't have any more. You don't question. You just, sort of take to the path, and questioning might even be considered, a bad thing or something like that. But actually, I remember a quote from Srila Prabhupada that said, faith without reason is just sentimentality. And so there's a role, but of course, reason without some form of faith and emotional investment is just dry mental speculation. So somewhere between cultivating our faithfulness in a path and being a sincere student and questioner, that's what Bhakti is all about, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. I guess for us, this is how it began, with questioning. And I remember even till now, whenever we meet somebody who's learned, we just bombard them with so many questions, and it never ends. I guess as you progress in Bhakti, the more questions you have, because this is a path of learning, and learning should never stop.
Actually, one of our teachers that we love so much, he says it so nicely. He says, an indication of a good session is that you come away with more questions than answers. And also in the great ancient wisdom text, doubt is actually considered to be a component of intelligence. So doubt is actually, not an unwelcome, guest, but someone that, really is pulling us in. And if we follow that thread and allow to explore that, we've always found that it leads to much deeper realization. So one of the things we always like to create is a safe space where no doubt is off limits.
Yeah, like one of the key wisdom texts, Vedanta Sutra, it says Athato Brahma Jigyasa, which means now is the time to inquire. And inquiry means some doubt, curiosity, peeking into things, and like going further with it. So doubt, along with an open heart to examine and accept things, is a very potent combination to progress in any journey of faith.
And actually, in the Bhagavad Gita, we see that Krishna and Arjuna's conversation is really a dialogue, where Arjuna is counter asking and saying, "But you just said that. Why are you saying this now? And I don't really understand this," and and so on and so forth.
And especially if you read Bhagavad Purana, which is another very prominent wisdom text, you see the student, King Parikshit, who's a grandson of Arjuna, he's asking very pointed questions. And it may seem like he's doubtful, but you see that questioning actually opens the door for such wider understanding. So doubt is, I guess where doubt, becomes an obstacle maybe is when we are not open to accepting the answers or examining further.
Absolutely. Well, I just hope that encourages everyone, because I did notice in a lot of the questions that came in, there was a lot of trepidation. Like, I hope I'm not being offensive by asking this. A number of people said that. And I thought, no, this is such a good thing. And so many of the questions, and you guys have looked over them too. I definitely had the same questions along the way, and sometimes still have them. So I think it's, we approach certain questions and then we approach them again from a different space, and sometimes need a slightly different answer. And at any rate, so here's the first question that came to us, and this is sort of taking a lot of questions that sort of had this in common. Noticing that in the talks that I've done, or the interviews that I've hosted over the past couple of years, that we often talk about going home to the spiritual world, and the potential of not being born here again in this material plane. And if I had to put the question broadly, it would go like this: that seems to condemn this world. There's something about that seems to say this place is bad or evil. And how could God make something that's bad or evil? Or what's so bad about this place? Sure, it's not perfect, but why would God create something that's so terrible and then put us here, or something like that? That's the heart of the question as I've understood it. So I'd love to just hear what you guys have to say about that, and maybe I'll chime in if it feels right.
That'd be great. Thank you. Such a great question. It's a question that actually I remember my father used to ask a lot. And even though it may seem that, sometimes, in our discussions, it may come across like, oh, the material world, is this and that. But actually, in the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna speaks about this whole material energy as actually being an emanation. So sometimes, and
divine.
Yeah, and divine. Yeah, definitely. And so, sometimes we think in terms of creation, but the Vedic paradigm actually speaks in terms of emanation. So emanation as in, like, there is a sun and there is a sunshine that is actually emanating from the sun. And so the sunshine, so the philosophy actually talks about simultaneously being one and different. So one in the sense that because it is emanating from the supreme divine source, so the emanation is also sacred and divine and is actually not different. But in another sense, because we, the tiny spark, we want to enjoy that emanation. So that's what creates that separation. Because now we are seeing what is sacred and divine as something that is meant for our exploitation. So that's what creates a separation. So for a practitioner of Bhakti, as soon as the consciousness shifts, and now we are no longer looking at this world as a place of exploitation and enjoyment, rather as a place for service, then that same world actually becomes, which it already is, sacred divine energy of the Supreme Person.
Yeah, it's basically where we are perched at is what we see. And our disconnect from the Supreme Divine is what actually makes this world not such a desirable place. And when we are connected, it's like a child going into their room and creating a mess there, and somebody likes to help them. They say, no, just leave me alone in my own space. And this is what we have done to this material world. Is our own doing in one sense, but it can be turned around in a second when somebody Krishna says that that is the nature of spiritual consciousness, that you see the divinity everywhere, divinity in everyone, in every situation. And in that spirit of compassion, the world becomes a very desirable place. There's no difference between that spiritual realm and this material realm.
It is spirit. Actually, Prabhupada also says, another place, our teacher, he says, matter is just another kind of spirit.
Yeah.
So there's no difference. They're both energy. And it is just based on our consciousness, whether something is material or something is spiritual.
Yeah, I guess the one reason why the material world is looked at in this light is because everything is temporary in this world, and everything has a beginning, and everything is, and there's birth, there's death. And that's what makes it a little bit of a uncomfortable place. And I guess that's why the wisdom texts say that one aspires for going back to the spiritual realm. But going back to the spiritual realm is also a matter of consciousness. So one can go back to the spiritual realm while still being here. There's no difference.
Yeah, that's true. Actually, all the great practitioners, the greatest, devotees, to them it makes no difference whether they're here or they're there. In fact, they don't even desire, sort of liberation or anything. They're just happy to be connected.
I guess the switch is changing the consciousness from me being the enjoyer, or me being in the center, to the Supreme Divine Krishna being in the center. And then in that spirit, then we have a mood of service and love, and that makes the place divine.
And so a follow-up question that's very similar is, and this is, of course, a big topic even within our own faith tradition, is are souls sent here because they've done something wrong to work it out somehow? Do souls simply choose to come here of their own volition? Why get drawn into the material emanation? Why get drawn into being an enjoyer, especially if it's so terrible? What compels the soul to do so, or how or why does the soul get involved? I know that's a huge question, but that very consistent in the questions that I've been getting.
Yeah, this is the nature of the soul, as is described in the Gita, is that it is a special energy of God, which is called the marginal energy. And it, as marginal means, it has the ability to choose by its own free will whether it wants to be connected with God or it wants to be on its own. And that is the meaning of love, to have that freedom of space to choose whether to love or serve or not. And it's very mysterious how a living entity sometimes chooses not to be connected to God and desires to enjoy on its own. But there is no place in this whole emanation where anything is disconnected from God. So this is a place which kind of it's kind of almost like an illusion for the living entity that God creates. Okay, this is a place where you can experience your own godhood, so called, and then. But at the same time, you're never disconnected from me. So it's designed in such a way that a living entity kind of starts understanding that it's not desirable for me to be disconnected, because then I become very limited. A living entity has unlimited potential, and coming to this material world, it starts feeling very limited, and that's what causes the feeling of this place is bad. But it's our own consciousness that creates that illusion.
Yeah, I really appreciate what you just said about, the freedom that is inherent. And actually, the reason why there is freedom in each living entity, because they're part of that supremely, free person. So because freedom is an aspect of the absolute truth. So we being sparks of that absolute truth, we also are inherently free. And because we are inherent, freedom means to be able to choose. And so we are allowed that freedom to choose that I want to stay connected, or I want to go experience this other dimension, which is, when perhaps I can experience what it's like to be the enjoyer and the controller. Let me try and experience this mood of controlling this energy, which is divine energy, and see if I can use it for my own enjoyment. And for all of us that come here, sooner or later, we start realizing that this energy is not easy to control or manage, and that's when we start realizing that perhaps our relationship with this energy is meant to be of a different kind. But that freedom to how to engage with that energy is something that is given to us. And
so in a sense, we are not being sent. We kind of choose to come here on our own.
There's a lot of follow-up questions that I think go something like this. well, if that's true, and it seems true to me too, right? And I wondered this myself, if this is true, and a living being, a spirit soul, says, by God, yes, I've chosen to be disconnected from my divine source, and now I'd like to be connected. It seems like from that point forward, it's very, very difficult to be connected. Even as a practitioner myself who chants every day or studies the Bhagavad Gita or whatever, I can totally empathize with this, because I experience such a tremendous division in my heart and mind about whether I actually want to be connected to God or not. It seems like if there's a moment where we say, oh, I want to go home, I don't like that I'm so torn up inside and I'm struggling, I can't do it. Could God, will you help me out? But it seems like this yogic path requires so much effort, so much. You have to chant, you have to give up all sorts of things and try to mold yourself into something that feels really, really hard. For a lot of people, they experience the yogic path, they start getting into it, they say, I'm just not capable of this. And it seems like if the realization is so obvious, yes, I feel the sense of disconnection and I feel the need to be connected, but then why should it be feeling so difficult? And I'm wondering what you guys might say to people to encourage those who are feeling this way. I could use it too,
I can completely and totally empathize with that, because I remember my journey, starting from that place where I was 24 at that time, and I looked at this whole process and I said, there's no way I can get to this, and yet, one finds oneself being pulled along, and the desire, we cannot underestimate the power of desire. It's actually what keeps a living entity wandering in this world, from one place, from one birth to the other. And so simply by just setting that intention and saying, I am completely, I don't feel like I have perhaps the necessary qualification, maybe I don't even have a very strong desire, but I have a little tiny little inkling of a desire. But that little tiny inkling of a desire, if it is somehow given an opportunity to just hang out with those that also have that same inkling of a desire, actually becomes a very powerful fire in itself. And so we find that by ourselves, that little fire can be, that little spark of fire can be extinguished by even a little whiff of wind. But if it comes together in the association of others who are also in that same space, then suddenly it becomes such a powerful force that, without our realizing it, without perhaps our even desiring it so deeply, we just get pulled along.
Yeah, I really like that point. It's like I see myself as a piece of wet log, and it's so hard to ignite a wet log, right? But if the wet log just, all it has to do is lie in the sun, and after a few days, then it's ready to, and then it doesn't seem very hard to ignite it. So our situation is like that right now. It feels difficult to practice this path or do anything in chanting or whatever we do. But I guess when we keep on doing it, without feeling that it is, I guess we'll go through that cycle of feeling hard, but still, I guess, going on. And anything desirable needs some effort, right? And even in this material world, what is easily obtainable? There's so much struggle to obtain anything. But compared to that, I find that I'm just being carried by the mercy of people around me and the mercy of God. And that's what actually, and you see that living example of that every now and then in your own life, that gives you that encouragement. Yeah, I can do it. I've been doing it, and I can. It's not that I'm doing it, but I'm being carried.
Actually, it's actually very, very natural, because there is an innate potential in every living entity. Just like, we see a little child, a little baby learning how to walk. It's the most intriguing, thing to actually see how a baby learns how to walk, right? It's because why? Because even though, it seems like the baby's struggling and then, is trying to crawl, sometimes trying to hold on to something, grabbing onto something and then falls down. But then, because there is an innate potential within the baby to be able to walk, So that's why, just by doing a little, few turns of that, immediately learns it. And we find that with the process of bhakti, that it is a very natural state of the soul. And, for one, I can tell you that I have not had a very strong sort of religious or even spiritual background. And yet, through the practice, one could see that, when you get it, then it's so natural.
Yeah,
it's very intuitive.
Yeah, I guess that's another point. I really like that point. That's the natural condition of the soul, is to love God. And it's not something that we're trying to acquire from outside. So the difficulty that we feel right now is kind of just wiping off the dust from that is covering the real nature of the soul. And very soon it becomes easier and easier as we just keep hanging out.
Yeah, one doesn't have to do anything.
Just hang out.
No rules, no, nothing. Just, being together,
Yeah.
it's natural. I mean, I think this was a question that was asked to Prabhupada once. How does one become an expert, sort of chanter, in this case? And he said, how do you become an alcoholic? And he said, you just go and you hang out, and then, gradually, little by little, you just like, okay, take a sip, and then, and then the next, and then it just happens very organically, actually. And bhakti is like that. So there's no need to feel any kind of pressure or any kind of compulsion.
Yeah, one can start with as little as 5 minutes or 2 minutes a day, and just do that with intention and with honesty. And simplicity of heart, and you see that grow, and we have seen that grow naturally.
Actually, I'm sorry, we've kind of taken off on this question, if that's okay, but just one more.
Yeah, no, please.
For me is, I don't know if anyone has ever made yogurt, and yogurt is basically this big pot of milk, and you take this tiny little bit of starter and you put it in that pot of milk and you just leave it. And then next morning, whatever, you wake up and you find that suddenly that pot of milk has become a big pot of yogurt. So it's kind of like that, just adding a little bit of a starter.
It's really encouraging to know that this is primarily a process of grace and mercy, and it really just takes the smallest intention and hanging out in that intention, even in small ways, whether it's chanting or listening to talks like this, or just being interested in spiritual topics, hanging out with people who are also interested in spiritual topics. And it doesn't have to be all at once. But somehow, I think people practically could get a sense of this, even if it's not the bhakti path per se, that if you're listening to this and you're feeling drawn to the teachings, for example, and it's probably the case that similar inclinations and teachings have been appealing to you at earlier stages in your life. And you keep coming back to similar interest in cultivating spiritual consciousness and prayer, meditation, spiritual topics, interesting interviews with people who are talking about spiritual topics. Just if you've noticed, well, at every stage of my life, this stuff keeps coming back. Well, there it is. There's the seed, falling on fertile ground, and it keeps growing because you just keep hanging out with that desire to grow spiritually. And then if you put it in the right environment and start watering a little bit more, and which is, I think, a big part of why certain practices end up being suggested. It's like, well, you can water it too. You can actually, you can hang out and you can put some water on it and watch it really take off, but I think the other image that comes to my mind that's really helpful and encouraging, is something that my own spiritual teacher mentions quite a bit, is, and it might have come from Prabhupada too, I'm sure it probably did, is when you're thinking about the process of taking to spiritual life, you think of a needle piercing through a stack of flower petals. The flower petals might be 100 flower petals, and the needle pierces through all of them in what appears like an instant, but it has to go through every single layer along the way. And from the perspective of, from God's perspective, it's instant. Once the soul starts saying, hey, I want to go home. I want to reorient my consciousness. From God's perspective, the needle goes right through. you know.
Mm.
It's just, okay, there's grace and mercy, we're just going to pull you along. But from our perspective, we get to feel often that, you know, the needle go through each layer.
Beautiful example.
That's a very nice example. Yeah, another thing that I heard, our dear teacher, speak about is that the journey that we have come so far is much greater than the journey that we have to make. So we've already traversed, like you said, this the seed that has already been planted, and that's why we keep going back to similar talks, and there is a sort of awareness that there's something amiss. So that is like we've already traveled a long distance.
Like this 99% of the work is done. As soon as the living entity desires that I want to go back or I want to reestablish that connection, right then and there, just said, you made like a tremendous amount of progress. So what is remaining is very little.
It's very little. Its intention is powerful. Desires are very powerful. So.
Yeah, absolutely. So encouraging. I think we'll leave one last question that's sort of in line with all of this. And I think we've already sort of addressed it, but we'll bring it up anyway. A number of people said, I've heard you mention vegetarianism. I've heard you mention some of your vows, for example, that you don't drink and other things. What if I'm not ready for those kinds of things? Can I still do bhakti, or is that considered like a big offense? And I might just say two things about this really quick and then ask you guys your thoughts, if that's okay.
Yes.
Yes, please.
My first thought is that in the Bhagavad Gita, there's very specific teaching that Krishna offers Arjuna, who's sort of a student asking God all these questions, and Krishna basically says, you shouldn't renounce things in a spirit of like repression, basically, just pushing things down just out of a sense of ought or should, and yet you're being sort of eaten inside by it. And I think that holds true when it comes to some of the things like vegetarianism and so on and so forth. These they look like rules on the surface, but really they're just meant to protect and guide the process along in a way that's smooth and guided. But I have had friends that I've met here in India, different temples in the larger, say, Bhakti yoga community, who have been at all different stages of where they're at with some of these things. And I have not seen it hold back anyone from, it doesn't disqualify or hold anyone back from practicing bhakti if they're not sure about some of the suggested lifestyle treatments like vegetarianism or whatever. In my opinion, it's like, if you keep practicing a lot of the things that look like they're rules, you just become naturally inclined to. In the same way, if you work out at the gym and you get home, you probably don't want to eat, something that's really doesn't feel good to your body because you just worked out. And I think there's a similar discernment that starts to emerge that just naturally tells you, yeah, I'm just ready to not do certain things anymore, but not because of a rule, but more just because I'm feeling so good that it naturally certain things start to appear to me as unsavory or like not what I want anymore or something like that. And until then, there's no use in like falsely repressing things or trying to jam yourself into a position that you're not ready for or something like that. Those are just my initial thoughts. I'd really like to hear you guys speak to this as well, because I think it's a very common, probably one of the more common questions that I get over the past couple of years, in fact.
Yeah, that's a very good question. And Krishna says that in the Bhagavad Gita, he says it's bhakti is about developing a higher taste. And as we start practicing bhakti, we don't have to change anything, our existing situation, whatever our likings and dislikings are, just adding a tinge of bhakti to that, and starts growing in your heart. And naturally, things which are good for us, they attract us. Things which are not good for us, physically and spiritually, we start losing taste in them. And it's a very organic and natural process. That's my own experience. When I started out, it's not that I was like I was into things that were not good for me, and gradually as I practiced bhakti, I just lost taste in them, and I didn't feel like doing them, as you're saying.
Yeah, I think there are no rules actually to start bhakti. And I really appreciated your point about repression, because that's one thing we don't want. We don't, because a repressed heart cannot love. A repressed heart can only experience frustration and anger. So we want to provide enough space for the heart to actually blossom and open up to newer ways of thinking.
And to choose.
And to choose. Again, the same idea of that freedom, that the choice is always ours. And we are not judged or we are not punished. And that's another thing that even growing up in India, and I do know that in other traditions too, there is this constant fear of God, that if I do this, then I'm condemned, and then something terrible is going to happen to me, or this and that. But bhakti is not practiced from a place of fear. It's actually practiced from a place of genuine desire, intention, and love. And when there is love, then there cannot be judgment. And so even if there might be things in our lives that maybe we are not so happy about, but we have to first of all be comfortable knowing that we are seen and yet we are loved. And from that place, now I want to offer my love and gratitude and then see how I get transformed, because bhakti is ultimately all about self-transformation. And you have to allow room for transformation. We're not beaten into transformation. It has to happen.
Because that's the only thing that will last. And it naturally happens.
Yeah.
There's this, Krishna makes a statement in the Bhagavad Purana, which is one of the wisdom texts. Very encouraging. Every time I read it, it gives me hope that, okay, I can also do it. He says that Krishna is making that statement to Uddhava, his cousin, but it's for all of us. He says, I know that in this path of bhakti, we are coming with our baggage, basically. And that basically sometimes we not so happy about it. And it causes us anguish and we struggle with it. But he says, just keep on doing what you're doing. And I understand your struggle, and I'm with you in this struggle. I'm just paraphrasing the whole thing. But every time I read it, I feel so encouraged. Okay,
there's empathy.
There's empathy there. There's no judgment, but rather there's empathy and then support and full.
Yeah.
I think we'll end. Well, I'm actually going to throw in one last question because these are so good, and I think we're on a little bit of a roll here. So we'll do one more. This last one I thought was, and I just paraphrased it as well, but it's loving God feels really abstract to me. How do I love God if I'm not even sure what God is or who God is? And how do I feel God's love in return if I don't even really know what or who God is? And the gist of this person also said, I'm open to it, but it's just so new to me. And so I don't really know how to love God or what God's love even looks or feels like in return. And I thought, wow, that's a great question. So I'd love to hear what you guys have to say about that.
So yeah, I mean, that's the whole process of bhakti, is really a process of receiving this love and being able to offer this love. And the best way actually to get to know someone and to experience a relationship with someone is to actually be present and to spend time. And so the process of bhakti is really a process of directly spending that time, hanging out. To know him is to love him. And so we are, and to, how do we know anyone? We just spend time, right? And get to know the person. So, and it's a very internal process, it's actually not something like, there's a verse in the Bhagavatam, it says that just like when someone's had a meal, then we don't need a certificate from anyone on the outside to tell us, hey, you are full. As soon as you eat, then your hunger will go away. One will feel superior strength, right? You feel some strength and you'll feel a lot of satisfaction.
And Prabhupada often says that, I mean, I have also wondered about this question. He's so abstract, I can't see him. How do I love him? And Prabhupada has said many times, like when you bite into an apple, we enjoy that apple, I enjoy blueberries. Is there anything abstract about that? No, because I'm directly experiencing that. He says that is God. That taste of the blueberry crunch in your mouth, and the taste is God. The sunshine, when we walk out in the sunshine and we enjoy the warmth of the sunshine, there's nothing abstract about it. That is God. We start with our level of realization.
The taste of water.
The taste of water is God. So Krishna says so many places in the Bhagavad Gita, this is where we are. We start with that, and then that realization grows, and then that abstraction, the veil of that abstraction starts fading away, and we start seeing him. The other way to experience him in more real ways is to hang out with people who have that love for God and who have that realization for God, and God starts becoming more and more real for us.
We see that actually. We see that anytime we're in the presence of someone who's, in whose heart there is this genuine attraction, longing for the Supreme Person, then that love actually makes, the experience of our love very real. So, it's very natural. So it may feel like that in the beginning, or when we are not really so familiar with it, but as the practices of bhakti give us a direct perception of the self and of the Supreme Self. There is no in between. And there's a verse in the Bhagavad Gita where it talks about that. It gives you direct perception. And so that's what we need, because anything else is just hearsay.
Yeah, our own experience is ultimate proof.
Yeah, my thought about that question was, there's something of a faith step that's required, but it's not a faith that I know what this is all about and what I'll experience and in advance. Yeah. It's the faith to say, I know there's no other way to test this out and to see if it's real, if I can experience it, than to do it for a while, to bring spiritual practice of some kind into my life, to chanting and so forth. If I bring bhakti into my life a little bit, then I can test it out for myself. And I would say that it is abstract until we start putting our heart into it. And then all of a sudden, when you put your heart into something, it's like the reward is your own heart. You put your heart into something, you start feeling, that's my heart. And there's for me anyway, there's a strange way. In the beginning, I was like, I don't know who Krishna is. I don't know. I'm a Western white dude. I have no cultural background, gives me familiarity with Krishna. I started chanting because I was into yoga, and I felt like I believe in mantra meditation very deeply. I started chanting, and the way that I would describe it is, over time, and I just said, okay, I'm just going to pour my heart into this and see what happens. I started realizing, my God, I have a faithful, devoted heart. That's in me. That's who I am. Oh my God, and then very close realization to that at certain moments, not all the time, but I was just moments of realizing that's what they're talking about when we talk about God and cultivating love of God. And that space that I'm discovering, that I have devotion and love, that's actually the nature of God too. And then this communion started growing. That's how I would talk about it. But it didn't come from having a sense of what I was getting into. It just came by saying, okay, I'm just gonna throw my heart into this and see what happens, and stick with it for a while. And then started noticing that these devotional practices resulted in feeling soulfulness and feeling some deeper truth of who I am starting to present itself in little moments, and realizing that this was the space that everyone was talking about, that these sacred texts were talking about, even if it were just tiny little glimpses. It was unmistakable for me. And I think that seems to be what we're talking about when we're talking about the taste of blueberries. It's like you have to taste it for yourself on some level.
Yeah, there are a lot of samples actually that are given right from the very beginning.
Yeah, the practice of bhakti, I guess, feel that they are designed in such a way that they provide a direct experience and then removes the abstraction right from the very beginning.
Yeah, and I wish, as you're saying, I feel like in the beginning you're given like, it's like you're given some starter coins, like you go, and I sometimes especially the first year, it felt like it was a waterfall I was drinking from, and and now of course it's in a different place. It's deeper. There's different work. There's different levels of moving into my own resistances, and there's ups and downs and ebbs and flows. But I think that one of the most amazing things about bhakti, and many people say this, is in the beginning there's a lot of grace and mercy that flows through, and it kind of it hooks you to the point where you go, I know I'm on the right path. And that's what keeps me going still today, is those first experiences that were so strong.
It's true. It's totally true. It's amazing. Actually, that's one of the things that we love most about this process of teaching, because we get to experience bhakti, through those beginner eyes, and then just that, the experiences that they have really fills up our heart.
And that allows us to actually start fresh every time we see that ourselves.
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, just reading these questions this evening and really taking them in and speaking about them with you guys is doing that, you know, for me as we go here. It's like, oh, this is so nice. It's so nice to, you know, just, you know, again, like I think even probably you guys would agree that in taking these questions, there's really no better way. I mean, as I go along, you know, and people ask me questions and I feel so unqualified to try to give responses, but even in trying to, I feel really nourished. It feels really good to even talk about this stuff, even if I don't even know if I'm getting it right, you know? So
there's a saying in the Bhagavad Purana that both the person who asks the questions and the person who attempts to answer them, they get equal benefit in terms of spiritual realization. So just by asking these questions, you get a tremendous amount of spiritual realization and transformation just by asking that question.
Yeah, absolutely.
So encouraging.
So encouraging, yeah.
Well, on that note, I think what I'd like to do is just plug your program again. Thank you guys so much for being here tonight. I think we got through some really good questions, and I want to refer everyone to your website, bhaktywise.com. If you enjoyed this talk, you will find that the gentle guidance that Loka and Vidarbha provide through this 12-week intro to the Bhagavad Gita is just wonderful. It starts March 15th. It runs to May 31st. It meets on Tuesdays from 8 to 9:30 p.m. Eastern time. All of the sessions are recorded. If you can't make it live, you will get the recordings. It's by donation. You can click on the Enroll Now tab to jump into the class. There are also some optional mantra meditation classes if you want to actually take up the practice of mantra meditation, which I highly recommend. Every day that before I make my content, the chanting has begun. So it's, you know, if you like my content, a lot of people say that they're drawn to the spiritual dimension that I bring to astrology content. And that, I have to say, honestly, it comes so much from making chanting a part of my everyday life. So that to me is a huge benefit of this program, is that you can also drop in free to daily meditation lessons. I also want to plug, if you are, one of the great aspects of this Bhakti tradition is the emphasis on art, poetry, music. And Vidarbha also has a wonderful Instagram page. If you go to it, it's Bhakti_poems. And she writes and regularly shares Bhakti poetry. I know a lot of people who watch this channel like Rumi and the Sufi poets, and not many people know that the Bhakti tradition is also a rich poetic tradition. There's so many songs and poems that are so deeply spiritual and about the emotional connection of the heart to the divine. So make sure you check out Bhakti_poems on Instagram if you also want to follow Vidarbha's poetry feed and all of the, she has videos and posts poems pretty regularly. So highly recommend that as well for just more nourishing content. So thank you guys so much for being here. Really appreciate it. I hope we can do it again soon. Maybe we'll try to do one more Q&A. If anyone has questions, you can email them to info@nightlightastrology.com. Put Bhakti Q&A in the subject line. Loka and Vidarbha, thank you guys so much for being here.
So much.
Thank you.
It's such an honor.
Such a wonderful pleasure to be with you and with all the audience.
Wonderful questions.
Wonderful questions.
Absolutely.
And I was thinking more about them.
For sure. Well, that's it for now. We'll see you again next week for another Bhakti Wednesday. Take it easy, everyone. Hare Krishna.